Today's project is largely inspired by an example in the Blacksmiths project book by Antonello Rizzo. However, I will not be following this step by step. I'm just going to use this as inspiration and see where it takes me. The video is brought to you by Skillshare. I'm going to start our hand project today with a piece of 1 by 3 by 10. So that's about 25 millimeters by 75 millimeters by 260 millimeters. Rough measurements, I'm just kind of guessing on this. That's about half the length of my arm to fingertips, and I'm going to use about half of it for the arm and about half of it for the hand. And I found a nice little tiny pair of tongs that should hold this just fine. I'm going to start roughing this out under the hydraulic press by separating out the part that will be the arm, and then I can concentrate on the hand, which is the most important part of it. While I'm under the power hammer, I'm going to go ahead and rough in a tenon. This will be used to mount the arm to a base later on. When I say rough, I mean really rough. This is certainly going to need some cleanup at the grinder before it's completely usable. Not only will that tenon give us a way to mount this to a base later, it'll also let us get rid of these great big monstrous tongs that weigh more than the project does. This should be a lot easier to handle. Now I think the full 1-inch thickness on this is too thick for a hand in the proportions that I'm coming out with. This is going to be a little bit smaller than an actual human hand, I think. But I do want to leave it thick through here. This part right next to your thumb is kind of thick and cushiony, so I want to leave a fat spot there. Spread this out a little bit sideways, spread it out longer. Then we'll look at cutting the fingers apart to actually make it look like a hand. For right now, it's just getting the mass where I want it so that when we do that, we end up with something that's a little bit more realistic. Once again, I'm going to do this under the power hammer. I'm going to put in some sculpting dies that are rounded in both directions, and that gives me a lot of freedom to shape something like this. I think it's time to let this cool, then I'll lay out for cutting the fingers. Well, this thing's cooled overnight, now I can lay it out, and I'm going to use my hand kind of as a pattern for this, and I'm going to try and look at some of the proportions and relationships that make a hand unique. For instance, the web of your fingers kind of runs in a little bit of an arc here, and of course your fingers are not all the same length, so I need to address those things. Get all that laid out, and then we can cut the fingers probably on the bandsaw, maybe with an angle grinder. We'll see what works the best. And then it'll be on to making the fingers look like fingers. Now I've cut about a ½ inch further down into the palm here than I originally laid out. It was just looking really out of proportion. And it's important to give yourself the freedom to adapt and to change your mind on some things. Things evolve and change in directions you weren't really anticipating, and sometimes you see it different as you're actually doing the work. Now, I have not figured out what the best technique is going to be for getting these fingers rounded up. I'm going to try and go octagon and round like you typically would. See if I can do that somewhere on the anvil. Maybe I'll need to try a bridge tool, something like that. But in the long run, I may have to just bend the fingers over one at a time and try and round them up that way. Going to try a lot of different things, so I don't have a consistent plan here. And if you see me jumping around while I do this, it's just me trying to figure it out. When we're all done, I'll tell you what I think worked best. Well, certainly going with a convenience bend made that easier, but I'd be really careful with that. I think if you bend these over at a sharp 90, you stand a real good chance of creating some sort of a stress riser and eventually breaking the finger off. Looking at other people's examples, places like Instagram, I've seen quite a few missing fingers, and I think that's the problem. And for me, I'm going to accept that there's a fair amount of work grinding to clean up that transition right down where the fingers meet the palm of the hand. But now, as is so often the case, time to let this thing cool. That's a great opportunity to thank Skillshare for sponsoring today's video. As a blacksmith, chances are you have other creative interests as well. Skillshare is a great way to explore other creative ideas and to expand your knowledge base on things like photography, video making, website design, illustration, and so many more. Skillshare has thousands of classes to choose from. One of my current goals is to get better at photo editing so that I can make better product photos and better thumbnails for the videos here on YouTube. So I'm taking a class with Jeremy Hazel on the basics of Affinity Photo. And this is just one of several classes that's available out there on YouTube on the subject of photo editing. So whatever software you might be interested in using, there's probably a class designed just to help you learn that software. But that's just a small example of some of the things you can learn on Skillshare. And the first 1,000 people to use the link in my video description or my coupon code BlackBearForge, you can get a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. So if you're looking to learn something new, let Skillshare give you a hand. Okay, that was kind of corny. Let's get back to the project. Now don't consider any of these things that I'm trying to clean up the insides of the fingers to be the best method. I'm just trying different things that I have available. I don't know if any of these are the best way to go. So far the slack belt on the belt grinder is doing the most good, but it also is somewhat dangerous because you can catch this on there and drive it into the wheel. Probably not going to hurt you, but it's going to break a belt. It might damage a contact wheel. So you got to be really careful doing that kind of stuff. None of this is going to be easy. I think if you're doing a whole lot of these, you would need some sort of special swedges that you could forge the fingers around, but all of my swedges are way too big on the sides, and I just can't get them in there to do this. But I usually find that perseverance pays off, so I'm going to persevere and keep working on this. If I discover something that really works well, I'll let you know. Otherwise, it's just up to you to use your ingenuity and figure out how to use the tools you have to get the results you want. Now I have been back and forth and around in circles on this project for most of a day, going from a little bit of forging to a little bit of grinding, letting it cool in between to make sure that there's no stresses built up into it. So while there doesn't seem to be that much more work done to it, it has been a fair amount of time. The next thing I want to do is start defining some caricature features of fingers, specifically the little folds inside the knuckles, because that's where I'm going to want this to bend when I shape the hand. I want it to actually bend at the knuckles and not in an even arch. So putting a little fuller mark in there I think will do that. I may use a chisel or something to try and put some little skin fold texture in the back of the knuckles, maybe even do something in the palm of the hand. I guess we need to do some palm reading in the future. I've let this cool so that I can lay it out cold, and I think for chiseling the back of the hand around the knuckles, just to give some details, can be done cold just fine. For the base, I found a piece already cut out in the scrap pile. This is 1/2 by 6 by 6. I've gone ahead and drilled a hole in it for the tenon that's on the end of the arm. I just want to put a bevel around it. Working from the back with the bevel down on the face of the anvil creates a cleaner, straighter bevel. I'm going to dish this slightly using this giant chain link as a bottom swedge. This just gives it a little bit more volume and makes the whole piece look more dramatic, in my opinion. But there's also the added benefit that it gives us a little bit of clearance underneath to either put a rivet head on the end of that tenon, or more likely just a place to weld it electrically, so I avoid causing any damage to the hand trying to put the rivet head on.